The text message glowed on my phone screen like a venomous snake. Surprise party for Iris tonight at the Grand. Everyone's invited, don't tell her. I wasn't meant to see it. Laura, my sister's best friend, had accidentally included me in the group message. Within seconds, a flurry of panicked texts followed, begging me to ignore the previous message. But the damage was done. I sat in my office at Apex Industries, staring at the corporate skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marketing reports lay scattered across my desk, forgotten. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the message thread before everyone hastily removed me. "Should we cancel?" someone had asked. "Too late now," Sophie had replied. "Everything's already arranged." "She'll find out eventually," Jonathan had written. Jonathan, my ex-husband, the man who'd shared my bed for 8 years before I caught him with my sister. And now they were throwing a party. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. "They're announcing their engagement," I said when he picked up. "Tonight." Jesus Christ. His voice carried the weight of shared history. "How did you find out?" "Laura screwed up, included me in the group text." "What are you going to do?" I watched my reflection in the window. Tailored suit, perfectly styled hair, carefully applied makeup hiding the shadows under my eyes. "I'm going to crash their party." "Iris, don't they want to humiliate me? Make me look like the bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle their true love? Fine. Let's see how they handle me showing up. At least let me come with you." "No." I straightened my spine. "I need to do this alone." The Grand lived up to its name. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gilt-edged mirrors reflecting the city's elite in their evening finest. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a red dress that had once been Jonathan's favorite. The maitre d' tried to stop me, but I brushed past him with the confidence of someone who belonged. The private dining room fell silent as I pushed open the double doors. 50 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from horror to pity to barely concealed glee. Sophie stood at the front of the room in a white dress, Jonathan's arm around her waist. My mother Margaret sat at the head table, her face a mask of careful neutrality. "Iris," Sophie's voice cracked. "What are you—" "Don't stop on my account." I grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "Please, continue. I believe you were about to make an announcement." Jonathan stepped forward, his CEO mask firmly in place. "You shouldn't be here." "Why not? It's a family celebration, isn't it?" I raised my glass. "To my dear sister and my ex-husband. May you both get exactly what you deserve." "You're making a scene," Margaret hissed. "Am I? I thought that's what we were all here for." I turned to address the crowd. "Did they tell you how they got together? How they spent months sneaking around while I worked late, building the marketing department that made Apex what it is today?" "That's enough." Jonathan grabbed my arm. I jerked away from him. "Don't touch me. You lost that right when you decided my sister was a better fit for your image." Sophie started crying, right on cue. Always the victim, never the villain. "Iris, please. We never meant to hurt you." "Save it." I downed my champagne and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Congratulations on your engagement. I hope you're both very happy together." I walked out with my head high, ignoring the whispers that followed me. In the elevator, I finally let my hands shake. My phone buzzed, Ethan asking if I was okay. I wasn't, but I would be, because now I had a purpose. Jonathan and Sophie thought they'd won, that I'd play the role of the scorned woman and fade into the background. They had no idea what I was capable of. They were about to find out. 3 days after crashing their engagement party, I sat across from my mother at her favorite bistro, watching her methodically stir sugar into her coffee. The clink of her spoon against fine china matched the pounding in my head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Margaret said, setting the spoon down with surgical precision. "Sophie and Jonathan are getting married. The sooner you accept that, the better." "Like you accepted it when they were sneaking around behind my back?" Her lips tightened. "I suspected something was wrong in your marriage long before that. And you didn't think to warn me? Would you have listened?" She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "You were so focused on your career, on being the perfect corporate wife. Jonathan needed someone who could—" "Don't." My voice cut through the ambient chatter of the restaurant. "Don't you dare justify what they did." A waiter approached with our meals. I stared at my untouched salmon while Margaret delicately sectioned her salad. "Remember when Sophie was 16? She asked. That summer she won the regional tennis championship?" What about it? You didn't attend. You were too busy with your internship at Apex. I gripped my fork tighter. That internship led to my current position. Yes, always the achiever. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. While Sophie watched from the sidelines, cheering for your success, supporting you, until she finally decided to take something for herself. The salmon turned to ash in my mouth. Take something for herself? She took my husband. Did she, or did Jonathan choose her? My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Emergency at work. Need you ASAP. Excuse me, I said, standing. Duty calls. Iris. Margaret caught my wrist. Don't do anything foolish. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. I yanked free. You taught Sophie well, Mother, but you forgot one thing. I learned from you, too. At Apex Industries, I found Ethan waiting in my office. His expression told me everything. Jonathan's calling an emergency board meeting, he said. He's restructuring the marketing department. He can't touch me. My contract. He's creating a new position, Chief Marketing Officer. Sophie's being considered for it. The world tilted sideways. Sophie, with her basic business degree and 3 years of middling experience, positioned above me in the corporate hierarchy. My sister, who'd already taken my husband, now reaching for my professional legacy, too. How did you find out? Laura. Ethan's smile was grim. She's feeling guilty about the engagement party text, started drinking at lunch, got chatty with the wrong person. I walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. 8 years I'd spent building Apex's marketing department from nothing. 8 years of missed family events, of late nights and sacrificed weekends. All while Sophie played the carefree social butterfly, apparently laying groundwork I hadn't seen. The board meeting's tomorrow, Ethan continued. 9 a.m. Who else knows? Just the executive team and a few key stakeholders. They're keeping it quiet until the announcement. I turned back to him. Remember that file I asked you to keep safe? The one about Jonathan's creative accounting for the Asian expansion? Iris, that's nuclear. If it gets out, he's declaring war, fine. But he's forgotten who taught him how to fight. My phone buzzed again. Sophie this time. Can we talk, please? I need to explain. I showed Ethan the message. Perfect timing. What are you thinking? I'm thinking my dear sister might be interested in some insider trading information. The kind that could tank a company's stock right before a major restructuring announcement. And if she takes the bait, I smiled, remembering Margaret's words about burned bridges. Then I'll give her exactly what she wants. One last chance to take something from me. Ethan shook his head. You're playing a dangerous game. No, I replied, typing a response to Sophie. I'm playing their game. They just don't know the rules have changed. I watched the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over the skyline. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Jonathan thought he could push me aside. Sophie thought she could step into my shoes. And Margaret thought she could manipulate us all from the shadows. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The board meeting was a masterpiece of corporate theater. I sat 3 seats down from Jonathan, watching him present Sophie's promotion with practiced sincerity. Her qualifications scrolled across the projection screen, while board members nodded along, their faces masks of polite interest. I kept my expression neutral, even as bile rose in my throat. 8 years of work, and he was handing my department to his mistress-turned-fiancé. Any questions? Jonathan asked, his eyes sliding past me. Just one. I tapped my tablet. Could you explain these discrepancies in the Asian expansion budget? The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Jonathan's smile flickered. What discrepancies? These unusual transfers. I forwarded the documents to everyone's screens. $5 million moved through shell companies in Singapore, another $3 million in Manila, all authorized under your personal codes. Whispers rippled through the room. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Those transactions were properly vetted by whom? I interrupted. Because I have emails suggesting otherwise. The board chairman leaned forward. Mr. Walker, perhaps we should table the CMO discussion and address these concerns first. These allegations are baseless, Jonathan said, and inappropriate for this meeting. Like sleeping with your marketing manager's sister while embezzling company funds? Dead silence. Jonathan's face went white, then red. That's enough. I agree. I stood, smoothing my skirt. I think the board has enough to consider. Shall we reconvene once you've reviewed the documentation? I walked out before anyone could respond, my heels clicking against marble floors. In the elevator, my phone exploded with messages. I ignored them all except one from Ethan. Sophie's waiting in your office. Perfect. She was pacing when I arrived, her designer dress a splash of coral against my monochrome decor. What have you done? Presented relevant information to the board. I closed the door. Isn't that what good executives do? You're trying to destroy him. No, Sophie. He destroyed himself. You just helped him do it. She grabbed my arm. This isn't about the company. This is about us. Us? I jerked away. There hasn't been an us since you decided my husband would look better in your bed. It wasn't like that. Tears welled in her eyes. We never meant to get caught, to hurt me. Save it for someone who still believes your act. Mother was right about you. Her voice hardened. You never could stand seeing anyone else succeed. I laughed. Is that what she told you? That I was the jealous one? She told me everything. How you always had to be first, be best. How you never had time for family because you were too busy climbing the corporate ladder. And did she tell you about Dad? Sophie blinked. What about him? Ask her why he really left. Ask her about the affair she had with his business partner. Ask her why we suddenly moved across the country when I was 12 and you were 7. You're lying. Am I? Think about it, Sophie. Where do you think I learned to spot a cheater? The color drained from her face. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed, the board chairman requesting my immediate return. Excuse me, I said. Duty calls. Iris, wait. Sophie's voice cracked. Jonathan, he has something on you too. Something from when you first started at Apex. I paused at the door. Let me guess. The Davidson account? How did you... Because I fabricated it. I smiled. Every document, every email, every transaction. I knew he'd try to use it against me someday. But those records lead straight back to his personal accounts. Funny how that works. You set him up all this time? No, Sophie. I just made sure I had insurance. The rest? That was all him. And you. I left her standing there, her perfect world crumbling around her. In the elevator, I checked my reflection. Not a hair out of place, not a crack in my armor, but my hands were shaking. Because Sophie was right about one thing. This wasn't about the company. This was about family, about trust, about the lessons our mother taught us without ever saying a word. And I was finally ready to teach them all exactly what I'd learned. The board's investigation moved quickly. Within a week, Jonathan was placed on administrative leave, and whispers of criminal charges filled Apex's corridors. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow as I watched security escort him from the building. Laura cornered me in the parking garage that evening. You have to stop this. Interesting. I clicked my car keys without looking at her. I didn't realize my sister's best friend had authority over corporate investigations. Sophie's pregnant. The keys slipped from my fingers, clattering on concrete. Laura's words hung in the air between us, heavy as lead. She found out last week. Laura's voice cracked. She hasn't told Jonathan yet, with everything happening. I retrieved my keys, my movements mechanical. And you're telling me this because? Because she's terrified. The stress, the scandal, it's not good for the baby, for your niece or nephew. A child, my sister's child, Jonathan's child, the future I'd once dreamed of, now growing inside the woman who'd betrayed me. Tell Sophie to take care of herself. I got into my car. That's all I can offer. At home, I found Ethan waiting with takeout and concern. You look like hell. Sophie's pregnant. He set down his chopsticks. Jesus, are you sure? Laura ambushed me, trying to use it as leverage to stop the investigation. Will you? I poured myself a generous glass of wine. Why should I? They didn't stop their affair when they knew it would destroy me. This is different. It's an innocent don't. The wine glass shook in my hand. Just don't. My phone buzzed. Margaret. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, I answered. What? I need you to come over. Her voice was strange, tight. Now. I'm busy. It's about your father. 20 minutes later, I stood in my mother's study, staring at an old leather briefcase I'd never seen before. He left this with his lawyer, Margaret said, to be opened if certain conditions were met. What conditions? If both my daughters were ever at war with each other. She pulled out a stack of documents. He knew Iris, about me, about his partner. He knew everything. My throat closed. Why didn't he say anything? To protect you girls. He thought if he left quietly, took the blame, you wouldn't have to know how badly I'd failed you both. She spread the papers across her desk. Bank statements, photos, letters, evidence of a decades-old betrayal that mirrored my own situation with painful clarity. Your father's partner didn't just steal his wife, Margaret said quietly. He stole his company, his reputation, everything he'd built. Sound familiar? I picked up a photo. My father, younger than I remembered, standing proudly in front of his office building, the same building where Apex Industries now stood. Jonathan's father, I whispered. That's who you had the affair with? Margaret nodded. History has a way of repeating itself, but you're not your father, Iris. And Sophie, she's not me. Why tell me this now? Because you need to decide what kind of story you're writing. A tragedy of revenge, like your father's, or something different. My phone buzzed. Sophie calling. I stared at her name on the screen, thinking of the child she carried, thinking of patterns repeating across generations. The investigation, I said. It won't just hurt Jonathan. It'll destroy the company, hundreds of jobs. Everything Dad built, gone again. Yes. Margaret touched my arm. But this time, you get to choose how the story ends. I answered Sophie's call. Her breath caught when she heard my voice. Iris, I need to tell you something. I know about the baby. Silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken words and shared history. Come over, I said finally. We need to talk about Dad. Dad? What about him? I looked at Margaret, at the evidence of old wounds and repeated mistakes spread across her desk. About how we're going to break this cycle, I said. All of us. The board meeting room felt like a tomb. Jonathan sat across from me, his lawyer hovering nearby, while Sophie waited outside. The chairman's words hung in the air. We need a resolution that protects everyone's interests. I spread the old documents across the polished table. These belong to my father. Proof that 30 years ago, your father orchestrated his downfall and took control of his company. Jonathan's face went slack. What are you talking about? Ask your father about Margaret Walker. Ask him about the summer of 1993, when he destroyed my family to build yours. His lawyer leaned forward, but Jonathan waved him off. This is ancient history. It has everything to do with this. I pushed forward a photo, his father and my mother, caught in an intimate moment. History repeating itself. Like father, like son. The boardroom door opened. Sophie stood there, one hand protectively over her stomach. The gesture wasn't lost on Jonathan. You're pregnant? His voice cracked. I watched his world shift, just as mine had. The lawyer started gathering papers, muttering about postponing, but I raised my hand. We're not done. I turned to the chairman. I have a proposal. Later in my office, Ethan paced while I stared out the window. You're letting them off the hook? I'm choosing a different ending. They betrayed you. They deserve... What? To lose everything, like my father did? I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. There's a child involved now, my niece or nephew. And that makes it okay? No, but it makes it different. My phone buzzed. Margaret calling again. I ignored it. The terms are fair, I continued. Jonathan steps down quietly. No criminal charges. The company survives. Sophie keeps her inheritance but stays away from Apex. Everyone loses something, but not everything. And what do you get? Control of the marketing division, a seat on the board, and... I hesitated. Peace, maybe. The door opened. Sophie stood there, tears streaming down her face. Is it true? About Mom and Jonathan's father? Ask her yourself. She's been trying to reach you all day. I can't face her. Not yet. She took a shaky step forward. Why didn't you use those documents to destroy us completely? You could have. Because I'm tired of being part of this pattern. I turned to face her fully. But understand something. This isn't forgiveness. This is me choosing not to become what destroyed our family in the first place. The baby will know their aunt, will know their family history, will hopefully do better than all of us. Ethan quietly left, closing the door behind him. Sophie sank into a chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Jonathan's father is flying in tonight, she whispered. He wants to handle the situation. Let him come. Those documents aren't the only insurance I have. What will you do? Nothing, as long as everyone honors the agreement. I sat behind my desk. But if anyone tries to change the terms, everything comes out, all of it, past and present. You've thought of everything. I had to. It's the only way to break the cycle. My phone buzzed again. Margaret. This time, I answered on speaker. They're all coming for dinner tonight, she said without preamble. Both families. We need to talk about damage control. No. Sophie's voice shook. No more secrets. No more damage control. Girls, we'll be there, I interrupted. But not to hide things, to end this. All of it. I hung up before she could respond. Sophie stood unsteady. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to face everyone knowing what we know. Together, I said, surprising myself. We do it together. She reached for my hand. I let her take it, feeling the weight of generations of secrets and betrayals between us. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. I squeezed her hand once, then let go. I know. But sorry isn't enough. We have to be better. For the next generation. Outside my office window, the sun was setting over the city our father had once ruled. Tonight we would face both families, armed with truth instead of vengeance. It wasn't the revenge I'd planned, but maybe it was the justice we all needed. Margaret's dining room felt like a war zone. Jonathan's father, Richard, sat at one end of the table, his presence as suffocating as I remembered from childhood. My mother perched at the other end, her fingers wrapped too tightly around her wine glass. This is blackmail, Richard said, tossing my father's documents onto the table. Ancient history dredged up to manipulate the situation. Like father, like son, I replied. Manipulation seems to run in the family. Sophie sat between us, pale and silent. Jonathan hadn't shown up, probably on his lawyer's advice. Smart move. We can make this go away, Richard continued. Name your price. It's not about money. I looked at my mother. Tell him. Tell everyone what really happened. Margaret's hand trembled. Richard, please. Quiet. His voice cut like a blade. This doesn't concern you anymore. Actually, it does. I pulled out my phone, pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room, confessing everything. The affair, the corporate takeover, my father's exile. I'd recorded our earlier conversation without her knowledge. One last betrayal in a family built on them. Richard's face turned purple. You manipulative little... I learned from the best. I forwarded the recording to everyone's phones. Check your messages. Everyone has a copy now. Insurance, you might say. Sophie suddenly bolted from the table, running for the bathroom. The sound of retching echoed down the hall. Your own sister, Richard sneered. You destroy her too. You don't get to play that card. I stood. Not after what your son did. What I did? Richard laughed. I saved this family's legacy. Your father was weak, running his company into the ground. Margaret knew it. That's why she chose me. Richard! Margaret's glass shattered in her grip, red wine spreading like blood across white linen. Tell them, Margaret. Tell your daughters how you begged me to take over, to save you from his failures. I looked at my mother, seeing her clearly for the first time. Is that true? I was trying to protect us. Tears streaked her makeup. Your father, he was going to lose everything. Richard offered a way out. By stealing his company, by driving him away from his children, by ensuring you girls had a future. She stood swaying. Everything I did was for you. Sophie returned, ghostly pale. Mom, stop, please. No. Margaret grabbed another wine bottle. You want the truth? Here it is. I chose power over love. I chose security over loyalty. And I'd do it again. The room spun. All these years, I'd blamed Richard, blamed Jonathan, even blamed Sophie. But our mother had orchestrated it all. That's why you pushed me toward Jonathan, I whispered. Why you encouraged Sophie to work at Apex. You were securing your investment. I was securing your futures. By repeating your mistakes through us? Sophie's voice cracked. By watching us destroy each other? Richard stood. This ends now. Tomorrow, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Iris, you're fired. Sophie, your shares will be bought out. This company stays in my family. Your family? I laughed, the sound brittle. Check your phone again, Richard. The last file I sent? Proof that you embezzled millions during the takeover. My father's signature, forged by you on multiple documents. His face went slack. You're bluffing. Try me. Tomorrow those files go to the SEC, unless what? Unless you sign everything over? To me, all of it. Sophie gasped. Richard lunged across the table, but I stepped back, calm. Your choice, I said. Your empire or your freedom. Margaret started laughing, a high, hysterical sound. Like father, like daughter after all. I looked at my sister, at my mother, at the man who'd destroyed my father. Victory was within reach. Total destruction, just like I'd planned. So why did it feel like I was the one being destroyed? You have until midnight, I told Richard. Choose wisely. I walked out, leaving chaos behind me. In my car, my hands shook so badly I couldn't start the engine. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Don't do this, he said when I answered. This isn't justice anymore, it's annihilation. Maybe that's what they deserve. But is it what you deserve? To become exactly what you've been fighting against? I watched Sophie emerge from the house, supporting our sobbing mother. Richard followed, already on his phone with his lawyers. One word from me, and it would all burn down. Just like it had 30 years ago. Just like it always would unless someone broke the cycle. The question was, could I? The clock struck midnight as I sat in my father's old office, now mine, staring at Richard's unsigned documents. The deadline had passed. In 10 minutes, the SEC would receive everything. The door opened. Jonathan walked in looking haunted. Call it off. Your father made his choice. He's in the hospital. Jonathan's voice cracked. Stroke, after you left. My finger hovered over the send button. Convenient timing. For God's sake, Iris, you've won. The company, the reputation, everything. What more do you want? Justice. For who? He moved closer. Your father? He's been gone 20 years. Sophie, the baby. Your mother? The baby. My hand trembled. You're just like him, you know. Jonathan's laugh was bitter. Richard, single-minded, ruthless, willing to burn everything for control. I learned from the best, both of you. The door burst open again. Sophie stumbled in, mascara streaked down her face. Something's wrong. The baby. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. Blood trickled down her legs. Everything stopped. The revenge, the deadline, the past, none of it mattered. I caught her before she hit the ground. Call an ambulance, I ordered Jonathan. He stood frozen. Now. In the hospital waiting room, our broken family gathered like ghosts. Margaret sat beside Richard's room, while we waited for news about Sophie. Laura arrived with coffee no one would drink. Ethan stood guard by my side. Mrs. Walker? A doctor appeared. Your sister's asking for you. Sophie lay pale against white sheets, monitors beeping steadily. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't. The baby's okay. Her hand found mine. But they said, the stress. I know. The weight of what I'd almost done crashed over me. I know. Did you send it, the evidence? I pulled out my phone, showed her the unsent email. No. Why not? Because we have to break the cycle. I deleted the draft. All of us. Jonathan appeared in the doorway. Richard's awake. He's asking for both of you. In Richard's room, the mighty titan of industry looked small against his pillows. Margaret sat rigid beside him, her face a mask. You win, Richard said hoarsely. The company's yours, but leave Sophie out of it. Leave my grandchild a future. I placed a USB drive on his bedside table. All the evidence. The only copy. Why? Because 30 years ago, two men let pride destroy two families. I won't let it happen again. The company will be run properly by all of us. I looked at Jonathan. You'll step down as CEO, take a board position. I'll run marketing and operations. Sophie gets her inheritance, but no direct involvement. And Margaret? Richard's eyes flickered to my mother. That's between us. I turned to her. You wanted to protect us? Start now. Tell us everything. No more secrets. She straightened. It will hurt you. We're already hurt, but maybe the truth can help us heal. Dawn broke over the city as our family began the long process of excavating 30 years of lies. In Sophie's room, monitors beeped steadily, reminding us what really mattered. Jonathan signed the papers transferring power, his hands steady. Richard slept, defeated but alive. Margaret talked until her voice gave out, each truth a stone lifted from all our backs. And I sat beside my sister, watching her rest, thinking of the child who would never know the weight of our family's past. The revenge I'd craved had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. The kind that comes from seeing your own reflection in your enemy's eyes. What happens now? Sophie asked sleepily. I touched her stomach gently, feeling the future move beneath my hand. We rebuild, differently this time. Together? Together. Outside, the city skyline caught fire with sunrise, painting everything gold. Somewhere in that light, I imagined our father watching, finally at peace. The empire he'd built would survive, transformed by the very thing that had destroyed it, family. Not a happy ending, perhaps, but maybe a healing one, and for now, that was enough. 6 stories above the city, my father's office remained exactly as he'd left it 30 years ago. I stood at the window, watching Sophie cross the plaza below, her hand resting on her growing belly. Jonathan waited by the car, keeping his distance as agreed. The door opened. Margaret entered carrying a cardboard box. The last of his things, she said, from storage. I nodded toward the desk. She set the box down, hesitating. There's something else. She pulled out an envelope. He wrote this the day he left, asked me to give it to you when you were ready. And you decided that was now? You're running his company, making peace with your sister, living with truths I tried to bury. She placed the letter beside the box. Yes, I think you're ready. I waited until she left before opening it. My father's handwriting flowed across the page. My dearest Iris, by now you know about Richard, about the company, about your mother's choices. You probably hate them. Maybe you hate me too for leaving. But remember this. Empires built on revenge crumble. Those built on understanding endure. I chose to walk away, not because I was weak, but because I refused to let bitterness poison my daughters. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to set down your sword. Love, Dad. The intercom buzzed. Ethan's voice. Board's ready. In the conference room, familiar faces lined both sides of the table. Jonathan sat near the end, Richard's empty chair between us. Sophie attended as a silent observer, her inheritance secure but separate from operations. I placed my father's letter on the table. 30 years ago, this company was stolen through betrayal and manipulation. Today, we're returning it to its original mission. I met each gaze. Transparency, innovation, family. And the past? Jonathan asked quietly. Stays in the past. We all have too much to lose now. The vote was unanimous. As people filed out, Sophie lingered. I found Mom crying in Dad's old files yesterday, she said. She kept apologizing to his picture. Some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who we are. Like us? I touched her shoulder. We're still writing our story. Later, clearing out my father's office, I found one last surprise. A photo behind his desk drawer. My father and Richard, young and smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. On the back, his writing, "Remember who we were before ambition poisoned everything." My phone buzzed. Margaret asking about dinner. Another text from Sophie about nursery colors. A message from Jonathan about tomorrow's meetings. I placed the photo in my desk, a reminder. Then I called Ethan. You were right, I said when he answered. about revenge not being the answer. No, he replied. I was right about you being strong enough to find a better one. Through the window, sunset painted the city gold, just like that morning in the hospital. But now the light felt different. Not an ending or a beginning. Just a moment, heavy with possibility. I picked up my father's letter again, running my fingers over his words. The empire he'd built hadn't crumbled. It had transformed, shaped by the very forces that once threatened to destroy it. Love, betrayal, forgiveness, family. The intercom buzzed again. Miss Walker, your sister's here. I pressed the button. Send her up. In the fading light, I stood in my father's office, now mine, and waited for Sophie. There would be hard days ahead. Trust to rebuild. Wounds to heal. A new generation to protect from old mistakes. But for now, this was enough. A letter from the past, a future taking shape, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest revenge is choosing not to take it at all. The door opened. Sophie stepped in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a tentative smile. Ready? She asked. I looked at my father's letter one last time, then tucked it away. Ready.